In the quiet neighborhood of Brookfield, Arizona, what seemed like an ordinary morning suddenly turned into a courtroom under the open sky when two imposters in black vests, along with the HOA president, showed up intending to detain a homeowner. But they had chosen the wrong man, because that man was none other than a seasoned FBI agent, someone they should never have dared to challenge. Brookfield, Arizona, a calm weekend morning. People often said this neighborhood never had anything memorable besides white fences and neatly trimmed lawns. But that day, right in front of house number 27, the familiar piece turned into a stage for an unexpected confrontation. David Mitchell, a middle-aged black man, usually known only as a quiet resident, stepped out onto his porch with a trash bag in hand. To his neighbors, he was a man of few words, someone who only nodded in greeting. No one could have guessed that behind that ordinary exterior was a very different identity. That morning, he only meant to take out the trash, but those few steps would set the stage for a storm that would rock the entire neighborhood. Waiting at the edge of his lawn were three figures. In the middle stood Karen Blake, the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman known for being strict and ambitious. On either side of her were two men in black vests, with the words "Community Enforcement" hastily stitched onto their chests. They stood rigidly, trying to look authoritative, but with just a glance, David recognized the fakery. Ill-fitting vests, loose straps, nervous eyes. They weren't real enforcers, just clumsy pretenders. Karen's voice was sharp. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk." David set the trash bag down, calmly replying, "About what?" The tall man in dark glasses stepped forward, his tone arrogant. "You're in violation of community regulations. We have the authority to detain you until the police arrive." The phrase "detain you" landed like a gavel strike, tightening the air around them. Behind curtains, pairs of eyes began peeking out, and phones quietly lifted to record. David looked at the three before him, his gaze sharp as a blade. He knew this was no ordinary discussion about rules. This was a staged spectacle meant to humiliate him in front of the neighborhood. And he also knew these people had just chosen the wrong man to confront. The air in front of David Mitchell's house thickened, as if the whole block were holding its breath. The words "detain you" had barely left the man's mouth when Karen Blake crossed her arms, eyes burning with challenge. To her, this was a show of power, a performance before the community, to prove that no one, not even David, was above the rules she claimed to represent. David tilted his head slightly, scanning the two men beside Karen. The tall, bald one's dark glasses reflected his calm face. In the sunlight, David noticed every small detail. Straps on the vest still new but buckled crooked. The community enforcement patch sloppily attached. The shorter one, with a scruffy beard, moved clumsily like someone who had never seen real training. In just seconds, David was certain these were no police officers, not even private security, just amateurs pretending. He exhaled slowly, his voice low but powerful. "Detain me? On what authority?" The bearded man glanced at Karen, then pulled a crumpled paper from his vest, reading it aloud as if passing judgment. "Mr. Mitchell has violated multiple rules, altering his driveway without approval, hosting loud gatherings, ignoring official notices from the association. The list is long." David nearly laughed, but restrained himself. "So that's enough for you to walk onto my lawn and think you can arrest me?" His tone wasn't loud, but it carried a force that made both men falter. Karen quickly cut in, unwilling to let silence ruin her performance. "Mr. Mitchell, we've warned you many times. You disregard the rules, you disregard the community. I cannot allow you to keep disrupting the order we've built." Her words, instead of affirming authority, sounded more like a personal accusation. Across the street, a curtain shifted, revealing an elderly face quietly watching. On another porch, a door cracked open, a phone lifted, its camera glinting in the sun. The neighborhood had become a theater, and this play was drawing an audience. David drew a deep breath, his dark eyes locked on Karen. "Mrs. Blake, I'll say this once. There's no such thing as community enforcement. These two aren't police, and you're standing on my property, trespassing. If you believe you have the authority, call the real police. Don't play this childish game." Karen's face flushed, but she didn't back down. "Do you think you can stand against the entire community? Everyone here sees you as someone who disrespects the rules. You're no different from anyone else." Her words echoed, but lacked weight, because everywhere eyes were watching, and the discomfort was no longer directed at David, but at Karen's tactics. The tall man stepped forward, his boots striking the concrete as if to assert dominance. His voice was cold. "You can come with us willingly, or we'll have to get rough." David didn't move, his stare sharp as steel. "If you think you can intimidate me with some bargain bin costume, you'll regret it. This isn't a game. This is breaking the law. I'm giving you a chance to walk away before this gets out of control." At that moment, silence fell. The air was tight as a wire, ready to snap at the slightest move. From the porches, whispers rose. A teenager started live streaming, and within moments, this standoff had spread far beyond David's front yard. It was becoming an event the entire neighborhood, and soon the world, was about to witness. The tension on Brookfield Street grew heavier by the minute. Phones were raised high, lenses aimed directly at David Mitchell's front yard. All eyes were locked on the three men calling themselves community enforcement, on Karen Blake, and on the middle-aged man standing tall, calm, as though untouched. But beneath that calm surface, David was already prepared for the worst. Mark Doyle, the tall man, tried hard to project authority. Suddenly, he pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs, holding them up like a threat. The sharp clink of metal rang out, drawing a collective gasp from those watching behind their curtains. "Mr. Mitchell, don't force us to get rough. If you refuse to come, I'll cuff you myself." His tone was rigid, but his hand trembled slightly, a clear sign he wasn't used to the tool he held. David narrowed his eyes, his gaze drilling straight into Mark's. "You really want to use that here? On an innocent man offering no resistance? Do you have any idea where that will land you?" His voice was low but carried, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Seeing Mark hesitate, Karen immediately jumped in, her shrill voice cutting the air. "Don't let him intimidate you. This is someone who's broken the rules over and over. He thinks he can do whatever he wants. If necessary, show him this community won't tolerate defiance." Her words rang out, but instead of agreement, a male voice suddenly shouted from afar, "This isn't enforcing rules, this is harassment." That voice was like a spark igniting dry tinder. Murmurs rose through the crowd, followed by a woman clutching her child yelling, "You think you're cops?" Tyler Brooks, the blonde teenage neighbor who had been live streaming from the start, grew bolder. He moved closer, phone raised high, and shouted, "Everyone's watching this live! Over 1,000 people are tuned in!" The whole block froze for a moment. The situation had spun far beyond the community. It was spreading across social media. Mark Doyle snapped around, pointing at Tyler. "Turn that off now, or I'll take your phone myself." He strode toward the boy, posture threatening. The crowd erupted with outrage, voices shouting, "Don't you touch that kid!" But before Mark could take another step, David moved. With a swift pivot, he planted himself directly in front of Tyler, his stare like ice. His voice cut sharp as steel. "You lay a hand on this child, and it'll be the biggest mistake of your life." The street fell silent. Mark froze, the handcuffs trembling in his grip, unwilling to move forward. Behind David, Tyler's breath came fast, but his phone remained high, capturing it all live. Anyone watching through the screen could feel the gravity of the moment. Ryan Cooper, the bearded man, began to falter. He tugged at Mark's arm, muttering, "We shouldn't be doing this. Too many people are recording already." But Mark, still trying to look tough, snapped back, "Shut up. We came here to do a job." Karen Blake, seeing control slipping away, shrieked above the noise, "Don't let Mitchell manipulate you! This is part of the rules. I am the HOA president. I have authority." But her words were immediately drowned out by shouts of protest. A middle-aged man bellowed, "What authority lets you hire fake cops to threaten your neighbors?" A woman added, "This isn't order, it's abuse of power." David stood firm, his voice steady but booming. "You see, this isn't law. This is deception, false authority, and it has no place here." Each word struck like a blade, slicing through the facade Karen had built. The neighborhood was no longer standing idle. More people stepped out onto their porches, phones raised openly, no longer hiding. That small front yard had turned into a public square where truth and lies now clashed in the full light of day. Karen bit her lip, her face flushed red, but she clung to her hard tone. "Mr. Mitchell, you cannot stand against this system. This community will never accept someone like you." But as soon as the words left her mouth, a woman's voice rang out from the crowd, clear, cold, and cutting. "No, Karen, what we don't accept is the way you're doing this." At that moment, Karen faltered. The power she had always believed to be absolute was now crumbling before her eyes. But in David's mind, he knew this was only the beginning, because someone like Mark wouldn't back down easily with his pride on the line. And in this situation, a single wrong move could explode into chaos. The air on Brookfield Street was suffocating. Whispers, protests, and phones raised high, all merged into a crushing pressure bearing down on Karen Blake and the two men she had brought. Yet Mark Doyle, the tall man, refused to retreat. His hand clenched the steel cuffs, the cold metal glinting under the harsh sun. Silence fell across the street, as though everyone was waiting for the detonation of a bomb. "Mr. Mitchell," Mark growled, trying to mask the tremor in his voice, "you have two choices. Come with us quietly or be cuffed right here." He raised the handcuffs, the clanging metal ringing sharply, sending a shiver through the entire block. David Mitchell didn't move. He looked straight into the eyes behind Mark's dark glasses, his voice deep, steady, every word slicing through the false confidence. "If you take one more step with those cuffs, you're not just breaking the law. You're committing felonies. Impersonating an officer, conspiracy to unlawfully detain, and assaulting a citizen on his own property. Do you know the penalty for that? Years in prison. This is no game." Mark froze, but Karen jumped in, desperate and shrill. "Don't listen to him. He's bluffing to escape. Cuff him, Mark. Show him who holds the power in this neighborhood." Her voice echoed, but instead of strength, it fueled stronger resistance. A man shouted from his porch, "Enough, Karen! This isn't the law! It's abuse of power!" A woman holding her child cried out, "You're putting our kids in danger!" David could see Mark teetering between pride and fear. Sweat dripped down the man's face as he clung to the role Karen had forced on him. Finally, he lunged forward, cuffs outstretched, aiming to grab David's wrist in full view of dozens of eyes and hundreds watching live online. But that was the fatal mistake. In a move so swift no one caught it, David pivoted, blocked Mark's arm, and applied a simple but precise hold. In under 3 seconds, Mark's arm was twisted behind his back, and the very cuffs he had brandished now snapped shut on his own wrists. He dropped to his knees on the concrete, his face twisted more from shock than pain. The neighborhood erupted. Shouts, gasps, cheers. A teenager screamed, "He flipped him in a second!" Tyler Brooks's live stream exploded with views, thousands now watching the impossible reversal unfold. David held Mark with one hand, never brutal, only firm. His voice was calm and final. "Stop resisting. You just put yourself in the hands of the law." Karen Blake stood frozen, her face pale, then flushed crimson. She shrieked, her voice trembling with venom. "You can't do this! You have no authority to arrest! This is abuse of power!" David turned to her, eyes cold as ice. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open for all to see, lifting it high so the sunlight caught it. A gleaming golden badge shone, the badge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His voice thundered, steady as stone. "I am Special Agent David Mitchell, FBI, and what you just did, Karen, is a crime. You brought imposters here, attempted an unlawful arrest. You've made a grave mistake." Silence blanketed the street. Then whispers rippled, swelling into a storm. A woman gasped, "I knew it! I always sensed he was different." A man's voice added, "Unbelievable! He's really FBI!" Karen staggered, eyes wide, scrambling for words. You're making this up! This can't be! You're just using that badge!" But David cut her off, voice like steel. "You think I'd wave a fake FBI badge in front of dozens of witnesses with live streams rolling? You just buried yourself, Karen. This is evidence, not a game." The crowd roared, no longer hesitant. Shouts rang out across the neighborhood. "She abused her power! We don't want this kind of leader! Let the police handle her!" Phones recorded non-stop, capturing every second. Mark Doyle, now cuffed, bowed his head, sweat dripping onto the pavement. Ryan Cooper, the bearded man, stepped back, face pale. He tore off his vest and threw it to the ground, desperate to disassociate himself. "I didn't sign up for this. I'm out." Karen glared at him, desperate. But even she knew her power play had collapsed. No one in the community stood by her anymore. They no longer saw her as a leader, but as a petty tyrant clinging to power in the most dangerous way. David kept a firm grip on Mark, calm and controlled. He didn't need many words. His actions, the gleaming badge in his hand, and the united voices of the community were enough to declare the truth. In that moment, Brookfield realized, false authority can instill fear for a moment, but truth, law, and courage decide the outcome. The shouting, filming, and chaos still swirled when another sound ripped through the air, the blaring wail of police sirens from the end of the street. Red and blue lights flashed closer, cutting sharp against the rows of quiet brick houses. The entire neighborhood turned toward the site. Karen Blake stood paralyzed, her face draining from red to ghostly pale. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone had called the police earlier, and now the moment of final judgment had arrived. 2 patrol cars swung into the street, tires screeching against the pavement. Doors flew open and 2 officers stepped out. One was a tall, broad man with a firm presence, Officer Daniels. The other a sharp-eyed young woman, Officer Harper. Their eyes swept the scene in an instant. A large man cuffed and restrained by a civilian, a tense crowd, and a woman trembling yet still clinging to her pride. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" Daniels barked. David immediately raised one hand, the other still holding Mark Doyle down to keep him from thrashing. His voice rang out, steady and clear. "I am Special Agent David Mitchell, FBI. This man impersonated an officer and attacked me on my own property. My badge is here, my credentials are in my back pocket." Harper stepped forward, her gaze locked on the gleaming FBI badge in David's hand. She took it, examined it carefully, then gave a firm nod to Daniels. His tone softened as he acknowledged, "Thank you, Agent Mitchell. We'll take it from here." He gestured to his partners, and within moments, 2 officers pulled Mark to his feet, secured the cuffs properly, and shoved him toward the patrol car. The big man no longer shouted. His head hung low, his face flushed with shame and fear. Ryan Cooper, the bearded man, had backed all the way to the curb, both hands raised. His voice shook. "I didn't do anything. I was pressured. I didn't want to be part of this." Daniels gave him a hard look. "You'll explain it down at the station. If you're honest, you may get some leniency, but don't think you're walking away clean." Ryan nodded frantically, sweat dripping, stripped of any community enforcer bravado. All eyes then turned to Karen Blake. She forced herself upright, her voice quivering but defiant. "Officers, this is all a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president here. I was only trying to keep order. This man, Mr. Mitchell, he—" Harper cut her off, her tone icy. "Mrs. Blake, there are dozens of witnesses and cameras recording everything. You brought imposters here, let them act like police, and tried to orchestrate an unlawful arrest. That's not order, that's a crime." The words cut like a blade. The crowd erupted, voices shouting, "That's right! We recorded everything! No one believes you anymore!" Karen staggered, her face crumpling, still scrambling for excuses. "You don't understand. I was just doing my duty. I wanted to protect this neighborhood." Mr. Miller, a quiet neighbor who rarely spoke out, couldn't hold back. He stepped off his porch, his voice sharp. "Protect it? You turned this place into a battleground just to feed your own power. We've lived here for years and never seen such disgrace." His wife added, "We've stayed silent too long. Now everyone sees the truth." Karen choked, her eyes red. She turned to David, as if still searching for a way out. "You think you've won? You've only made this neighborhood more chaotic. You don't belong here." David looked her straight in the eye, his voice calm but each word heavy as a hammer. "No, Karen, it's you who doesn't belong in leadership. Power doesn't come from fear, it comes from respect, and you never had that." Harper signaled, and another officer stepped up, placing a hand on Karen's arm. "Mrs. Blake, you need to come with us for questioning. If you resist, we'll have to use force." Karen jerked back, screaming, "You can't! I'm the HOA president! I have authority!" But her protests only drew bitter laughter from the neighbors. Daniels answered coldly, "That title doesn't put you above the law. If anything, it should make you understand it better than anyone." He nodded, and Harper guided Karen forward, ignoring her thrashing. Her cries dissolved into lonely, desperate noise, drowned out by the crowd's angry roar. A few clapped, some whistled, and phones filmed non-stop. The entire neighborhood witnessed the woman who once held absolute power being led away, stripped of authority, left only with a pitiful, shameful image. David stood silently. He didn't smile, didn't revel in victory. He only let out a quiet sigh, his eyes drifting toward the children, peeking out from behind their parents. He knew this moment was not just the downfall of one person. It was a living lesson about how false authority can tear a community apart if no one stands up. Daniels turned back, nodding at David. "Thank you, Agent Mitchell. You handled this the right way. It could have been much worse." David replied simply, "I didn't want blood spilled. I just wanted justice served." The crowd slowly calmed, but their eyes had changed. No more suspicion, no more whispers. To his neighbors, David was no longer just the quiet man at house number 27. He was the one who stood up for truth, who shielded the community from abuse of power. From this day forward, they would remember this moment as a turning point. Harper stepped forward, her eyes locked on the gleaming badge in David's hand. She took it, inspected it carefully, then nodded to Daniels. The officer gave a curt nod, his tone softening. "Thank you, Agent Mitchell. We'll take it from here." He signaled his team, and within seconds, 2 officers hauled Mark to his feet, securing the cuffs properly before shoving him toward the patrol car. The burly man no longer shouted. His head hung low, his face burning with shame and fear. Ryan Cooper, the bearded man, had backed all the way to the curb, both hands raised. His voice trembled. "I didn't do anything. I was pressured. I didn't want to be part of this." Daniel shot him a hard glance. "You'll explain at the station. If you tell the truth, you may get leniency. But don't think you're walking away clean." Ryan nodded rapidly, sweat pouring, stripped of all his so-called community enforcement bravado. All eyes now turned to Karen Blake. She forced herself upright, her voice shaking but defiant. "Officers, this is just a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president here. I was only trying to keep order. This man, Mr. Mitchell, he—" Harper raised a hand, cutting her off, her tone cold. "Mrs. Blake, there are dozens of witnesses and cameras that recorded everything. You brought imposters here, let them act like police, and tried to orchestrate the unlawful arrest of a citizen. That's not order, that's a crime." The words fell like an axe. The crowd roared, voices shouting, "That's right, we filmed it all. No one believes you anymore." Karen staggered, her face twisted, scrambling. "You don't understand. I was just doing my duty. I wanted to protect this neighborhood." One neighbor, Mr. Miller, usually quiet, finally erupted. He stepped into the yard, his voice sharp. "Protect what? You turned this place into a battlefield just to satisfy your personal power trip. We've lived here for years and never seen such disgrace." His wife added, "We've stayed silent too long. Now everyone sees the truth." Karen choked, eyes red. She turned to David, still searching for a last chance. "You think you've won? You've only made this neighborhood more chaotic. You don't belong here." David's gaze held hers, his voice calm, each word like a hammer. "No, Karen, it's you who doesn't belong in leadership. Power doesn't come from fear. It comes from respect. And you never had that." Harper signaled, and an officer stepped forward, laying a hand on Karen's arm. "Mrs. Blake, you need to come with us for questioning. If you resist, we'll have to use force." Karen shrieked, "You can't! I'm the HOA president! I have authority!" But her cries only drew bitter laughter from the neighbors. Daniels answered coldly, "That title doesn't put you above the law. If anything, it should make you understand it better than anyone." He gave the signal. Harper guided Karen forward, ignoring her thrashing, her desperate screams dissolving into lonely echoes drowned out by the community's outrage. Some neighbors clapped, others whistled. Phones captured everything. The entire neighborhood watched as the woman who once held absolute power was led away, stripped of all authority, left only with a pitiful, shameful image. David stood silently. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply exhaled, eyes drifting to the children peeking out from behind their parents. He understood this moment was more than the fall of one person. It was a living lesson that false authority can destroy a community if no one stands up. Daniels turned back, nodding to David. "Thank you, Agent Mitchell. You handled this the right way. Things could have been much worse." David replied simply, "I didn't want bloodshed. I only wanted justice served." The crowd gradually calmed, but their eyes had changed. No more suspicion, no more whispers. To his neighbors, David was no longer the quiet man at house number 27. He was the man who defended the truth, who shielded the neighborhood from abuse of power. From this day forward, they would remember this moment as a turning point. When the patrol cars rolled out of Brookfield, carrying cuffed Mark Doyle, trembling Ryan Cooper, and Karen Blake pale-faced in the back seat, a strange stillness fell. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind a heavy silence. Neighbors remained gathered on their porches, many still holding their phones, but no one spoke at first. They had just witnessed a power play collapse, and the raw truth left the whole street shaken. The next day, Tyler Brooks's live stream clip spread across social media. Within hours, tens of thousands of views, thousands of comments, most outraged at Karen and the imposters, the rest praising David Mitchell. Local news quickly picked it up. HOA president detained after failed police impersonation. FBI agent targeted was her neighbor. The once quiet Brookfield neighborhood had become the center of attention. 3 days later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting at the community park. Nearly every resident attended. The chair at the head table sat empty, a symbol of Karen's downfall. After years of ruling through fear, she had no place left. The vote was swift and unanimous. Remove Karen Blake and appoint Harold Jennings, a calm, trusted man, as interim president. Just as the meeting seemed about to end, many neighbors turned their eyes toward David. He hadn't sat in the front row, only quietly standing in the back. But a voice rang out, "Agent Mitchell, say something to us." The crowd joined in, clapping and cheering. David hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. He didn't take the president's chair, he stood off to the side, careful not to make himself the center. His voice was steady, deep, but firm. What happened last week was no small matter. We saw how false authority can spread fear and fracture a community. But we also witnessed something more important. When people speak up, when a community stands together, the truth wins. He glanced across the faces, old, young, children peeking out from behind their parents. Leadership isn't about control, and it isn't about intimidation. Leadership is responsibility. It's service. Without respect, power is just an empty shell. Karen didn't fail because someone stronger opposed her. She failed because she never understood this. Applause broke out, not wild, but unified. Many nodded in agreement. Some wept, freed at last from years of oppression. After the meeting, David returned to his ordinary rhythm. He didn't seek praise or enjoy the spotlight. He still watered his plants, still nodded politely to his neighbors. But the looks he received had changed. No longer mere courtesy, but genuine respect. A week later, as he rolled his trash bin to the curb, Tyler Brooks came running up, phone still in hand. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "the video from that day hit 1 million views. People are calling you a hero." David gave a faint smile. "I'm no hero, Tyler. I just didn't let bullies win. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Never stay silent in the face of injustice." Brookfield slowly returned to peace. But from that day on, whenever someone walked past house number 27, they no longer saw just an ordinary home. They remembered the morning when one man stood firm against deception, and the whole community learned that real strength doesn't lie in handcuffs or fancy titles, but in respect and justice. Sometimes, the smallest events in a community reveal the biggest truths. False authority can spread fear, but it can never defeat courage and unity. A neighborhood is only truly strong when people respect one another, when leadership means service, not domination. Injustice grows if we stay silent, but the moment one person stands up, an entire community can change. True power doesn't come from control, it comes from trust, justice, and kindness. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on truth, justice, and the strength of community, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us. because sometimes the most important battles aren't fought far away. They happen right here, in our neighborhoods, our families, and our daily lives.